Hello, everybody. Hello there. Welcome. Welcome to another RPG First Look. This time, a first look.
Welcome to the Math Squad.
Thanks, Javelad. This time, we're taking a first look at Offworlders. Offworlders, which is a sci-fi. Well, you know what? I'm gonna let Chris Wolf, the author of this, I'm gonna let Chris tell you in the publisher's own words. So this is from the Drive-Thru RPG description. This is how we answer question number 1. What is this game about? And then we're going to dig into the PDF and we're going to see questions 2 and 3. How is the game about that? And what are we rewarded for? So Offworlders is a science fiction role-playing game about adventurers, outlaws, and guns for hire making their fortune on the rough end of the galaxy. It's designed to be straightforward enough to pick up and be ready to play in just a few minutes as a one-off game, but with enough meat to play a short campaign as well. The player characters in Offworlders are owners of a small starship in a time when humans have spread to many worlds. Together, they explore the universe, completing profitable jobs and overcoming dangers together. You'll fly between planets, taking on the dangerous work that no one else wants. You'll fight ruthless pirates, explore drifting derelicts, and go toe-to-toe with weird alien monsters, just to make enough credits to keep your ship flying. You'll overcome these challenges by the skin of your teeth and come out stronger on the other side. On long voyages, your characters will learn about each other and grow together. Offworlders uses a tried and true 2d6 roll to resolve dangerous and uncertain actions, from lying to a customs agent to getting into a shootout with a gang of void pirates. Player characters are simple enough to be built in minutes but can be customized with a wide selection of abilities. Offworlders is built on the foundation laid by World of Dungeons by John Harper. If you've seen that game, you have a pretty good idea of how Offworlders works. It's more than just a reskin. Offworlders contains brief but thorough chapter of GM tools and structures to plan single sessions as well as campaigns. Like World of Dungeons, Offworlders is designed to be heavily interpreted in play, hacked to bits, and customized to taste. If you played any games powered by the Apocalypse, you'll recognize the core mechanic immediately and can play highly improvisational sessions. If you prefer your sci-fi old school, you can bring out your hex map, sectors, and old modules and run them with Offworlders' minimalist stats for NPCs and ships, converting ahead of time or on the fly. So it is a World of Dungeons hack set in a sci-fi universe whose mechanisms and GM structures and what have you will be built to support customizing your own stuff. Now, this is it's sort of an interesting thing because the lineage of World of Dungeons is that Apocalypse World came out and we made Dungeon World based on D&D and Apocalypse World. And John Harper made a 2-page game called World of Dungeons, which was sort of John's jokey demake version of Dungeon World. Now, it's not to say that the game's design is jokey, but John made it as kind of a tongue-in-cheek pretend version from 1979 of Dungeon World, claiming that we were making this sort of second edition of World of Dungeons. It was a very John Harper move. It's a super cool game, very stripped down, and I'm interested to see how Offworlders adapts that as a sci-fi game. Basically, in World of Dungeons, to give you a kind of frame of reference, we take all of the core moves of Apocalypse World or Dungeon World and run them down to basically just defy danger. Everything in the game is 2d6 plus or minus a stat. 10 plus you get what you want, 6 or less you miss, 7 to 9, the GM gives you a hard bargain, a choice, a cost, whatever, right? Now, what makes Offworlders interesting to me is that in John's game, given that it's only 2 pages, there is a lot of reliance on the game master being able to come up on the fly with results appropriate to the setting and to the fiction of those moves. Now, if you've ever played Apocalypse World or Dungeon World, you might be feeling like Defy Danger or Act Under Fire is the hardest move to run in the game because it's certainly the most improvisational and the most in the moment. Even now, years down the line, I find that I rely on a bunch of kind of old tricks that I've built up to make that move happen. So what I expect from a game that is based on World of Dungeons is some guidance around how to improvise, right? These games tend to be obviously improvisation heavy because of the core stuff, and they ask a lot from the game master. So I'm curious to see what Offworlders is going to give us to make those decisions and to make sure that the fiction is flowing in a way that doesn't feel like we are just winging it all the time. The GM stuff is what I think is maybe most interesting about this sort of game. And then additionally, what guidance do we get around creating our own custom material for the game? And how much of a debt runner is this? Now you'll notice that if you've watched a lot of these first looks, folks come to me with games that fall into a certain niche, right? They've played Dungeon World, or they watched Swan Song or Far Verona, and they're like, you know what? Adam likes sci-fi. Adam likes space. I bet you he'll have some insights into those materials. So let's get him to take a look at this game. And so what's really cool is that I get to sort of compare and contrast and see all of these different ways that we can use the various subsystems available to us and the games that we're already familiar with to create those sort of debt runner stories. The genre, what I call the debt runner genre, it is it's a term. I think Hillary McNaughton came up with this term. It's a term for that kind of Firefly, space rogues, Han Solo-esque, like you own a ship, but you have obligations or a debt that you need to pay off. And so most of the game is about paying that debt back. It is a core conceit in a lot of modern sci-fi, whether it's Traveler, Stars Without Number, or in this case, Offworlders. So let's see what tools Offworlders gives us to play those kinds of games. Now, before we dig too deeply into the mechanisms of the game, look at this art. So the game has one author, right, Chris, and one artist, Olivia. And the artist does the layout, and you will see there is a really nice through line where this game feels cohesive from a visual perspective because of the small team. And I think that's one big advantage that small press games tend to have. And the smaller the game, the more direct that aesthetic can be. Yeah, I'm really enjoying these sort of one artist things. So you'll see that the game maintains a very clean design all the way through. And we can see this in small games and in big games, right? Zweihander does a little bit of this. But this was the thing that sold me on taking a closer look at Offworlders. For people who say that art in a game doesn't matter or isn't that important, you're wrong. It's certainly not as important as the mechanisms of the game, but as a reinforcing thing and as a marketing decision, right? It's very important, and it's always been important, right? The reason why people attach to things like Planescape or Dark Sun was because of Tony DiTerlizzi or Brom, respectively, right? The cover art of a game, the first thing you see of a game is actually pretty damn significant and can say a lot about the game. I love the fact that this is a duotone, right? We only have two colors. We have yellow and we have black, and you don't really see this, especially in sci-fi. Sci-fi tends to be purple, tends to be dark green or blue. It tends to look like NASA pictures of nebulas. But this is this whole other thing. This reminds me of a like an indie comic. It kind of gives me a like a zine vibe, which is really cool. And I really like how stark and clean the art is, and how it uses the sort of dot description, like instead of total blackness, we have this gradiated blackness and cross hatching. I think it's very cool. And this is actually only half of the art. If I take you back to the first screen, the pre-show screen, you can see a full version. And so you can see that this is the cover. The person on the left of the screen is on the back cover of the game. So it's a wraparound cover, and it's so ominous. Why? What is going on here? Like, it's a spacesuit. We got a bag. We got somebody pointing a gun at somebody. I interpret this as someone getting a gun pointed at their back as they walk away. There's something very very interesting about this art, and I think it's a cool cover. The title of the game too, Offworlders, indicates to me like an outsiderness, right? Like, think about the titles of some of your favorite games, like Dungeons and Dragons. It's got dungeons, it's got dragons. It's a pretty simple title. Offworlders is cute because Offworld immediately makes me think of the off-world colonies. Right? It makes me think of Blade Runner in that way, puts me in a sci-fi mood. Off-world as a single word is a nice evocative thing. But what's cute about this is that it's got world in the title. So it immediately pulls us to the mechanisms. It ties us back to World of Dungeons, Dungeon World. It's a really nice way to like wink at the games that it was inspired by without calling it like World of Space, Space World, Stars Without End. Like it's a very nice subtle something. And I think that the design and the choices made throughout this game in terms of its aesthetic are all kind of on par. They're all there's some subtlety in design, and you can tell that I think that Olivia did all of the art and the layout, and you can really see a designer's skill throughout this book. So we took a look at this one. This is the beginning section of the game. This tells us that stuff that we read before, what we do in the game. This is the claim that the game is making, right? Now that you've opened to the first page, this is telling us, all right, what can you expect to do? What is this game going to be about? So the first part of the book describes the general rules that everybody uses. The second part is the game master stuff and will help us understand how to run Offworlders. So it's a traditional GM and player authority spread within the game. And I guess we'll see how the mechanisms do that thing. So the game itself is licensed under Creative Commons, which is cool. So if you do build something for it, you really like it, you can throw your own thing in there and you can publish it. As we talked about before, Offworlders is inspired by World of Dungeons, owes inspiration to Me and Sage, Traveler, Stars Without Number. Traveler and Stars Without Number are the originator and the kind of most popular, I think, of the two Debt Runner games. I think that pretty much everything that is of this genre owes something to Mark Miller and Kevin Crawford, right? We were all touched by these games. So it's nice. And this is a thing that I think every indie game, personally, I think every indie game should do. I think every game should do this. We should talk about what we're inspired by. I feel like it's so important to be like, not just from a marketing perspective, but to be like, this game owes things to these games. So if you like our game, check these ones out. That kind of culture of sharing, I think, is super important. So playing the game, game master, we got some sheets. The whole thing is 27 pages. So that's cool. That's nice. So we get our little semi-skeuomorphic art here, right? Where it's like the characters in the game planning an operation, but it's also like a tabletop kind of vibe. More of that dot art. Very cool. Playing the game. So let's take a look. See, again, with the illustrations, like I really like that we're getting a kind of mix of in-universe and out-of-universe illustrations. So even a picture like this, which is like you need a notebook and you need some dice and you need something to write with, it has a sci-fi vibe to it, right? Which keeps us both in the universe and kind of gives us that look at like I actually quite like art when it depicts the people playing the game. I think that's really cute. Yeah. So usual stuff, tells us what we need to play, character sheets, pencils, orange slices, and tells us where we can get those things. So that's nice. And then we get our little intro, which is the game is a conversation, which if you're familiar with the Powered by the Apocalypse subsystems of games, you'll probably have read this before. I don't think there's anything like new here. It's kind of giving us an idea of like the conversation, which at this point, like whatever, 10 years in now, I think that we take for granted that at one point this was pretty revolutionary. Like Vincent laying out clearly in Apocalypse World, the game is a conversation, and like in a conversation, I say something, then you respond to it, you say something, someone else responds to it. That was pretty new. It was pretty new when Vincent said it. Not in an understanding way. We all knew that already, but the way that Vincent described it and made it a rule of the game, right? This game is a conversation. And just like in a conversation, if you talk over somebody or try to assert dominance over the conversation or just generally act like a jerk, that's against the rules, right? We wouldn't allow that in a conversation. So why would we allow it in a game? There's quite a fair bit of GM advice that I've given around Powered by the Apocalypse games that is about reminding people the game is a conversation. Would you allow this in a conversation? No? Then it's probably against the rules of the game, right? So nice to have that reiterated for people who haven't seen it before. Some basic terms in the game, things that we need to know to understand what is the shared language, right? Attribute, skill, health, ability. So these are the things that we actually do need to look at, because this is where it starts to diverge and starts to become its own custom thing, right? So in the game, the characters are made up of attributes, which is our between -1 and +3 raw talent. Skills, we get 2 of them. Represents training, right? We'll see how those work. Health is when you take damage, you become less healthy. And then special ability, a special action or stunt you can perform. You're going to get 2 of those. And then we get XP in this game. So we'll find out how that happens. So we earn XP and spend it to get new abilities. So this is a, rather than a tiered system where it's like at level 2, you get an ability, at level 3, you get an ability. It looks like Offworlders, you accumulate a pool of experience and then you spend it to get stuff. All right. So here's something that I think is interesting. So this is the rolling the dice part of the game. This is the mechanisms of the game. Page 4. How does the game work? We put it all on one page at the beginning, and this is the basic stuff, right? And this is what I was talking about before about the core game is that 3 result defy danger style roll. There are a couple of adjustments here. So if the GM decides it's risky or uncertain enough to warrant a roll, go to step 2. Now, this is different from most Powered by the Apocalypse games, right? Powered by the Apocalypse is, for a lot of games, not all of them, but for a lot of games, powered by that idea of to do it, right? If you describe it, make the roll. If you want to make the roll, describe it. But in this case, there's a gate, there's a threshold where the GM decides whether it's risky or uncertain enough to warrant a roll. So in this model, you are describing what you're doing and waiting for the GM to say, okay, this is risky or uncertain. So it's more of a task resolution than an automated rules kick in process. So you might be able to get away with stuff if it's simple, because there aren't any custom moves here, right? This is a drift away from the core Apocalypse World stuff, where in Apocalypse World, if I were to say, do something that is a move, I always make that move, whether it's risky or not, whether it's relevantly dangerous or not. The rules are neutral to the ongoing danger in the situation. But in Offworlders, we roll when the GM thinks that it's risky or uncertain. So that's interesting. We choose an appropriate attribute. Again, gated by the GM. The GM's going to make that final call on which attribute we use. And then talk about potential outcomes. So unlike in, say, Mouse Guard or Burning Wheel, in those games, when you get the difficulty, you are locked in. If you say, I attack the Duke with my sword with the intent to murder him, and the GM says, okay, that's ob 6. And I'm like, oh, okay, I only have 3 dice. I would like to do something different. I can't, right? I'm locked into that action. In Offworlders, you talk about potential outcomes as a group, right? What could happen? And I think that this is something that helps you know what you might expect on a 7 to 9, right? Rather than saying, I do the thing, I make the roll, and on a 7 to 9, I will find out what the complication is. You talk about it in advance. Now, I think that this is sort of interesting, because I would want principles to guide that conversation, because I could see it purely hypothetically. I could see it getting bogged down, right? I could see it being like, I'm going to hack the engine terminal so that I can power up the engines of the ship. Okay, that's going to be rolling with tech or whatever. I don't know what the stats are. We'll look at it in a second. And then, okay, what might happen? And so the GM might say, well, if you get a 7 to 9, then maybe you can only do like burn for a minute. And then I might say, well, I mean, we have so much fuel. Like, wouldn't it be more appropriate if the engine stalled out? And another player might have something to say. So I wonder if the principles in the agenda of the game are going to guide us towards kind of keeping this step from getting really drawn out. It does feel a little bit like the, in terms of flow of play, it feels a little bit like a devil's bargain. You know that moment in Blades? Like if you've played Blades before, any game based on it that has this, the devil's bargain is a moment where any player can offer up a fictional bonus. They can say, well, you get another die if you do this thing, right? If this thing happens, it's the devil's bargain. You get a bonus die and do the thing. But there's that moment of like, what if, right? What if this? What if? And in this, it's like, what will happen on a 7 to 9? And I think that on the plus side, it reduces drag after the roll because we all know what the complication is. This is like in Burning Wheel when the GM says, if you fail, this will happen. And I'm actually pretty bad about doing that. I often forget because I think a lot of the time it's obvious. And maybe if it's obvious, the potential outcome is clear. You have this conversation fast, it's clear, and you move on. But I wonder in play, like I'd like to see how long with any individual group that step 3 tends to take. And then we roll the dice, add the attribute. 10 plus, we get a success. 7 to 9, it's a complication, which we talked about, and then a miss. The GM will make a move and we get experience, right? So it's got that reward structure of there's our first point. This is a game about learning from your failure. If it's not about anything else, mechanically, it is about learning from your failure, and we are encouraged. And again, I think this is an interesting pair because the GM gets to decide when we make the roll. So the GM is in a way gating how much XP we get. Again, to make an analogy to a game I'm very familiar with, in Burning Wheel, sometimes it can be hard to get those easy tests because the GM keeps not making you roll ob1. So I think that there's a delicate balance there for the game master to decide when to roll or not. This game has a crit mechanic, so if you get 2 6s, that's a crit. You get what you want and something extra, and then a skill in this game lets you re-roll one of your 2 dice, and then like most Powered by the Apocalypse games, the GM doesn't roll. If an NPC attacks, then the PCs have to avoid that attack, etc. Right? Most of the things are results of bad things happening. We only roll when it's interesting. And again, these feel like they work at the table, but in a raw rule set, I have to wonder, I guess it just means that the GM gets to decide what is or isn't interesting. And I suppose, as with any conversation, a player might pipe in and say, it seems like I should roll here. And the GM will say, you know what? Okay, maybe it is interesting. Maybe it is risky. You can kind of push on the GM, but ultimately the GM does get to say when you roll or when you don't. So interesting. A lot of authority on the GM's part in terms of when we engage the mechanism. But nothing never happens. No matter what the outcome is, rolling dice always changes what's going on. There's not going to be like, you get a miss. You can't do the thing. Everything stays the same as it was, which is good. That's obviously really important. It feels like a given for me. In a role-playing game now. Like, I don't know that I could play a game in which nothing ever happens is the default. And I would love to see more mainstream games just have fail forward built in, because I think we deserve it as a hobby. So the attributes of our characters, these are our -1 to +3. This is strength, agility, intelligence, and willpower. So these characters are strong, agile, smart, and willful in varying degrees. They might have training in athletics, culture, manipulation, pilot, science, sneak, survival, and tech. So again, if you were trained in one of these things, you get to re-roll one of the dice. Now, I don't know, because my brain doesn't work this way, but I don't know what the math is on that. How much more likely are you to succeed on a D6 if you are allowed a re-roll on one of them? I'm going to leave this up to you, chat, because I don't math like that. And then you're going to get 2 abilities, and I don't know yet what the abilities come from, but I bet you anything it's from your class. So, making an Offworlder, we pick a class. We're either going to be a warrior, an outlaw, a geek, or a psychic. Nothing here indicates that we have to each be one of those things. So you could theoretically have a party of warriors, or 2 outlaws and 2 psychics, or whatever mix of those in your group. You're going to have a few abilities to choose from. You pick any 2, and then you choose 2 skills. You assign your attributes. You get +2, +1, 0, and -1 for your stats. Your health is 12 plus your strength and agility. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff. Fairly like easy. You get 3 supply. Supply is like coin, I guess, in this. I wonder if gear is abstracted and to what degree. So you get 3 supply. Supply is an abstract amount representing any items you might be carrying. So do we adventuring gear everything with supply and then just Felix's magic bag? I'm okay with that. Because often it's like, do you have the gear you need in the moment? You do until you run out. And then we also get 3 credits. So credits and supply are different. We have 2 different currencies there. We'll look at page 11 and figure that out. We get 1 light weapon. And then either another 7 credits or some light armor. And a 2nd weapon of any type. Okay, so everybody gets the same choices. And then we name and describe our character. Come up with at least 1 distinct visual detail that describes them. And then, here we go. So you can customize your classes in the game by adjusting it. So this is our first hacking option in the game, right? So if you want to hack the game, you can just choose any 2 skills and any 2 special abilities. This is straight from World of Dungeons. You can look at the classes as basically presets of selected abilities. So if you don't like warrior, outlaw, geek, or psychic, you could throw them out and rebuild something different because you have a set of abilities you can choose from. Offworlders doesn't have any specific stuff for alien species. You should decide if intelligent aliens exist. If somebody really wants to be an alien, let them. Maybe all psychics are the same species, or the warrior learn their skills because they're a member of a warlike species. Often humanoid aliens are fundamentally just people that fit into specific tropes and archetypes. Right. So this is interesting too, because it's a point of saying, like, sit down and discuss this. Now, in a generic game like this, I would almost have liked a preceding page that walks us through choosing sci-fi tropes, but I guess that might be in the GM section. So we'll see. So here's some examples of characters. We won't linger too hard on these ones. But here's what the classes are. I think they're fairly straightforward. I do like that we get that kind of play this class if you want to do this. I think that's a great piece of stuff that should be in more games, especially games that are fundamentally about blocks of mechanical stuff that you're choosing, right? Like, why would I want to be a geek outside of like the name of it? My options for abilities for being a geek are analytical. So you can ask a simple question about objects, people, or surroundings when you encounter a new situation, area, or character, right? So you just know something. Chemist, which is you spend supply to create medicine. You have a little drone with drone controller. Hijack, medic, right? Basically gives you abilities that you can do more things than you normally would be able to with your skills. And I like that. I like when classes or abilities expand on something that everyone can do, right? Like in Dungeon World, everybody can like find and disarm traps, but only the thief has a rule that provides certainty for doing so. It's a powered by the apocalypse advanced design move of looking at moves, not only what can the player do, but where can you give certainty to certain types of character, right? So if you're playing, and this is something that I think that games that rely on a sort of chaos plateau like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, I think they often fail at this. And we've seen this dozens of times in the actual play stuff that I've run, where a character is supposed to be very good at something because they have a big bonus to that thing, but then they roll 1s and 2s over and over, and they feel like they're not any good at that. And so you can build into classes the ability to reroll through skills or special abilities that say, you know, if you roll, and this is something from World of Dungeons, if you roll a 6 or less when you are using this ability, instead treat it as a 7 to 9, right? You can never do worse than a 7. You will always get what you want when you do this thing, but sometimes it will cost you. It's like the bumpers in a bowling alley. And I think that if you control it, if you constrain it, right, you wouldn't want to do that for like dying or combat if your game were about that. But that idea of a reliable, unfailing thing, you might sometimes not succeed as well or as coolly as you'd like, but you can be put in this position where you can never really fail at something. And I actually think that that's really important for cinematic styles of play. Yeah, and you can see it I think even D&D does this. reliable talents, right? Where you can do these things where it's like you cannot get less than this thing. Some games will compensate, not to expand out too far into a general game design conversation, but some games will do this with points. They'll say you can re-roll, right? If you fail at this, spend a point and try again. You see this in saving throws in D&D a lot, but I think in this game, I think the idea of in games based on Power of the Apocalypse, the idea of giving someone a chance to re-roll or bumper your skills, whether it's based on a per session basis or whatever, you can do that. And you can see this ability down here for the outlaw, right? Once per session, count any miss as a partial success or partial success as a total success, right? You can give this to a warrior and say like once per session an attack roll. You can constrain it to certain instances or certain abilities. So this is a way to show that the outlaw is lucky, right? Once per session, they get that thing. They've got some other abilities like cheap shot and reckless, smuggle, shoot first. They're all like the kinds of things you'd expect from a roguish character. And then we have our psychic, right? And I think rather than, and this is something that I tend to lean towards, for magical abilities in a game like this where magic, space magic, psychic stuff, Fate does this too, where this is not like the main focus of the game. I like giving people a kind of open opportunity to just do the psychic thing, right? To be like, let's constrain your abilities. Let's understand what your character's kind of psychic stuff is about, and then give you opportunities to do those other things. You can see it in Dungeon World with the ritual move. So in this, I would probably allow a psychic who has like premonition and blast to be able to use forceful abilities outside of the pure constraints of their description here, right? So allowing magic user types to express their magic in a more broad way, I think allows you some freedom that you might not have as that kind of character. And it does open you up to feeling like pretty magical, right? But again, in a game like this, they're able to do that because the GM chooses when there's a move in place or not, right? So the moves, the abilities help us constrain what might be a move or what might not be a move, right? If you have blast, you can probably shove and push and, use your psychic abilities aggressively outside of purely just punching people with psychic abilities, right? If you have premonition, you probably get like weird feelings or ideas about the world that come from your psychic senses that aren't purely the expression of this move. Now, the game doesn't say that, but that's kind of more that's my impression of this kind of thing. And that's sort of what I would do. And then if all you want to do is just be tough and kick the crap out of people, you could play a warrior, be a soldier, bounty hunter, right? And this is one of those reroll extra bonus veterans instinct things, right? Where you can kind of reroll that. So we choose our class. There's a page about fighting and damage, which in this game really it's fighting isn't a separate system. Dying is, health is a separate system, but fighting is just getting things done, right? I would like to avoid being killed. I would like to kill my enemy. I'd like to get from point A to point B without being killed by this machine gun, right? You have a constrained, dangerous situation in which you are making rolls, but fighting is not really any different than an environmental hazard or any other thing. Now, health and dying, those matter because they're tied to a mechanism. So if you reach 0 health, you're out of action. If you're an NPC, you're probably dead. If you're a PC, you have to roll the dice with the results below. Higher willpower means that you are more likely to live. This feels a lot like a last move or a last breath move, right? 10 plus, you made your death saves. You're gonna be okay. 7 to 9, you are dying, but you lose something. 6 minus, the PC is doomed, might not die right away, but they get to do a last thing. They will not live to the end of the game session. And I quite like this. I like giving the players the ability to say like, okay, you're dead. You're dying of your wound. You can have like a last thing that you say. Maybe the poison that is coursing through your veins won't kick in for an hour or so. Maybe you die in your bed back on the ship. But it turns over the narration of your demise to the person who is playing the dying character. And I think that's cool. You could port this to other games relatively easily, right? Like if you lose if you go down and you are recovered, say D&D, you go down and you are recovered with only one death save made, then you're fine. If you had to make 2 death saves before they recovered you, then maybe something bad happens to you. If you stabilized on your own, then it works one way. And if somebody else brings you back, it works a different way. You can add some nuance to it by looking at a granular approach. Because in D&D, again, you see this thing where death doesn't really matter because you drop and you come back a lot. But in Offworlders, we're seeing how death what does it count for, right? Sometimes if you're willful, you're going to be able to drop and come back. And it's not as bad as it looked. But because the math of the game puts you in that 7 to 9, dying is going to cost you something. And I see this as a fun opportunity. I like playing characters who remember their demise. They remember being shot by, the lizard people on Planet X because they have that terrible laser burn from it, right? Yeah. So armor in this game subtracts from damage. Pretty straightforward. I imagine that means there's probably armor-piercing weapons that ignore that. First aid is something we can do if we have supply. So anybody can do first aid if you have supply and a few quiet minutes. And if you get a good night's sleep, you get half your maximum health back. So it takes you 2 days with good night's sleep, or the equivalent in a cryostasis pod or whatever, to get all your health back. So in the game, there's credits and there's supply. Credits can be used to buy us things like spacesuits, passage to another world, starship upgrades, hover tanks, and space stations, right? So that's money. 1 credit is a substantial amount of money and should be the smallest amount of currency you track. Anything under that is irrelevant unless you're completely broke. Supply is abstracted gear and tools. Yeah. So you begin with 3 supply. You spend 1 to produce any mundane item. Right. Okay. So everybody has adventuring gear. If you need a 3.3 to the infinitum metal pole to explore a collapsing space station, you could theoretically spend a supply and say, I take it out of the supply closet. We're good to go. Then you can write it down. It's a real item. Some items are heavy. If you try to do anything athletic while you're carrying a heavy item, it slows you down and causes narrative complexity. That makes sense. So yeah, some of this gear, if we look, like 3 credits, 6 credits, an assault armor's 40 credits. Like, credits are pretty. I wonder how credits are going to affect the debt running part. Like, what is the idea? Yeah, it's coin and load in Blades. It's coin and adventuring gear in Dungeon World. I'm curious to see how that money affects the debt part. Like, what is sapping our credits? How do we pay off the debt? What is the structure of the thing? And that'll be in the GM section, I'm sure. Yeah, also shout outs to the Quiche Lorraine. That's a great name for a spaceship. Very into it. So speaking of which, oh, and that's nice. That's very cool. You put the art for the ship and then describe the ship on the next page. That's nice. That was a good lead in, using the design to lead us into the next chapter. So we start with a spaceship. This is a default thing. This is built into the universe of the game. If you play this game, you get a spaceship. It's not a generic like sci-fi game. It is a game about flying around on a spaceship and then theoretically paying it off. The ship has a small cargo hold, does 1d6 damage, has 15 hull, no armor, and 4 max fuel drive. You select 2 upgrades. They open up new opportunities for the ship, the type of jobs you get, and reflect your choices. So if you don't have luxury passenger quarters, you won't get luxury passengers. If you have a massive cargo hold, you get shipping jobs. So it's a flag for the game master to know what you're interested in. Yeah. And then you choose a name for your ship. So make your ship, choose 2 upgrades, advanced drive, electronics, afterburners. Some of these seem to be about making the ship better at what it already does. And then others are things that are for getting you additional stuff, like jobs and more about your fictional positioning. Cool. And then you can buy additional upgrades for 50 credits. So you can spend your credits on assault armor and drive fuel and light weapons, or you can save it up and spend 50 credits. Now, again, in a game based on an economy, I'm looking for rules or guidelines around how much money we should get for a job. What is the pacing of this game? Because games like this are built on 2 layers of pacing: character advancement and debt payment, right? How much money we make. So I would expect that there are maintenance costs, right, for ourselves and for our characters, or for our characters and for our ship. And then there are additional costs being sapped from us in terms of our credits. And I do think it's interesting that the game has this kind of Socratic approach, in the sense that it's asking questions during the player section and then hopefully answering them in the GM section. And I think that's a nice way to build a book, to say, here's how to play. And as you're reading it, being like, okay, and then how do I do this? How do I handle this thing? And then you get to the end of the player section, and players, people who are reading this game just to play characters, they don't need to think about that stuff. Whereas someone who's playing to GM, they're thinking like, how do I do this? How do I temper all of these pieces and make a campaign out of it? So, controlling the ship has no attributes of its own. It does have hit points. If it has 0 hull, it's disabled. If a person gets hit with a ship weapon, you multiply it by 5. Small arms can't hurt a ship. You travel using their spaceship. You can get around in a few hours within a system. It uses drive fuel to get from one place to another. It takes a week and a unit of fuel to travel to the nearest system. And we'll look at mapping and stuff later. And then maintenance, it costs 1 credit for every 2 points of hull. So that means, how much do you start with for hull? 15. So it's not actually that expensive to fix your ship, because if you have to, you'll be blown up before you run out of credits to fix it. Right? 15 hull is not that much, especially a cost of 1 for 2. Drive fuel costs 3, and you can get it pretty much anywhere. So here's how we get experience points. Failing, right? The GM puts before us a die roll, and we biff it. We throw the roll. Okay, so that's XP. At the end of every session, you answer the 3 questions, right? This is the Dungeon World thing. Did we earn a profit? Did we discover something new and interesting about the universe? Did we overcome a difficult challenge or dangerous adversary? That is what this game is about, right? From the player perspective, if you want to improve, take risks, earn money, discover things, overcome difficult challenges. That's how we get better. That's how we win Offworlders. We can also, and this is cool for campaign play, if we're on a long trip together, we learn about each other. When you travel between systems or otherwise spend multiple days in a small space, go around and give everyone a turn. On your turn, ask another player a question about their character. It could be about their past, their goals. If they answer the question honestly, earn an XP, ensure everyone gets a chance to answer. They don't have to be asked or answered in characters, but the player should discuss how you learned about it. The GM doesn't ask a question. So this is the campfire phase, right? What do I learn about you? Tell me about how my character figures out what the war was like for you. I think that's cool. Learning about each other in campaign play gives us something to do during travel time. We can kind of montage that stuff. I think that's very cool. Yeah. So that's another way to do it. If you're playing a one shot, obviously you're going to do end of session once, and you're going to roll some misses, and you're never going to advance, so it's fine. But let's take a look at what we can spend that on. So if a PC has 10 experience and some downtime, they can spend it to get an advancement. So it costs 10 XP to get a new class ability. You can do that 3 times. It costs another 10 to increase your attribute by 1 the first 2 times, and then another 20 to increase it the last time. And let's see if we can do this math real quick. So let's say on the first session, we do all 3 things. We earned a profit, we discovered something new, and we overcame a difficult challenge. We would have to fail 7 rolls in the first session. So I don't think you're going to advance after that first session. I'd love to see the playtest data to see how much we advance. And also, given that there are 6 advances in the game, that's the end of the game, right? When the PCs get close to maxing their advancement, have a discussion about how to bring the ongoing campaign to a satisfying conclusion, right? I feel like, if I had to guess, to get to that point, I don't know, maybe like 20 sessions. I guess it depends on how aggressively your GM gates rolls. This is one of those games where I would feel frustrated if I wasn't allowed to roll. I would be like, no, I want to roll the dice. I want things to happen. I want to fail. So I would have to push myself to learn what the GM considers a dangerous situation. I mean, obviously you can hack this, right? Just cut all of those costs in half if you want a smaller arc. Really easy. Or double the XP you earn. Yeah. All right, so this is our game master section. We're going to talk a little bit about maybe answering some of those questions that we asked early on, right? So we have 3 goals in this game. Everything that the GM should do is to serve these goals. Portray a dangerous and exciting sci-fi universe, right? Don't make the universe boring, which is interesting because Debt Runner at its core as a genre, pretty boring. You don't want interesting things to happen if you're a character. So I think that this has the trappings of Debt Runner, but I'm starting to feel like the paying off your debt thing is an excuse to go on an adventure and maybe less the core concept of the game. Because in a more traditional Debt Runner model, like in Traveler, for example, there's a reason why you can play Traveler solo, right? You're just rolling to see how much money you make from any given job. And if there's a complication, you just roll a skill to resolve it. It's not the meat of the game. Much like basic D&D is about avoiding fights and getting money, and 5e is about getting in fights and having an adventure-y time, right? So maybe the debt running part is not actually that important. We'll see. So exciting and dangerous sci-fi universe, fill the characters' lives with conflict and adventure, which again, if you're trying to pay off your debt, you don't want conflict and adventure. You want the GM to fuck off with all that. And you want to just have the job go smooth. But we're playing this game to, again, make a profit, discover new and exciting things, overcome difficult challenges. That's really what the game is about. Yeah. And then play to find out what happens. This is a given thing. Yeah. And when I say that the Debt Runner model is boring, what I mean is you want it to be boring. Boring in the sense of like it's happening smoothly. You don't want complications. Complications are a setback. What you really want is to make money and get rich. But the game is not about that thing. So what should you do? How do you serve those things? Ask questions and use the answer, right? Offworlders, like many Powered by the Apocalypse games, leave you to figure this stuff out yourself. Prompt the players and let things snowball. Right, respond to player action, carry the narrative through, and then respond to the dice. So this is the part where it's like, how do we deal with 7 and 9? You'll have to come up with trade-offs and consequences on the fly. That's why step 3 is so important. So there is that whole thing. Like the game acknowledges working out the consequences of a roll before you roll is how they take the pressure off. Ask the players, like, what do you think will happen? Or I think this will happen if you mess it up. It's interesting. I would have to work hard to play it that way. Because I like when the players have to jump in without knowing what the consequences are, but the game demands that you have that conversation. I guess I would want to understand as a group, like we want to do this quickly. Let's make it fast. To keep that punchiness up, right? Yeah. And then the suggestions here are show the players how their actions complicate and escalate the situation, right? This is pretty good advice for all the Powered by the Apocalypse games. Like make sure that the miss results are connected to the ongoing narrative, right? And then, yeah, the Die of Fate. If you can't decide, if you need to randomize, just roll a d6. High is good, low is bad. You can make it a yes, no. It's a simple oracle. Pretty straightforward thing. It does disclaim some of that responsibility, right? Apocalypse World doesn't let you roll dice to just guess at things. But in this game, there is some room for saying like, I don't want to. So when starting a session, you need to be ready with events the players can respond to. We call them jobs. A job is a list of events and facts centered around a particular goal or problem. Additionally, write down several questions, write stakes questions that you're interested in asking. You can make the job as vague or as detailed as you want, and you can flesh them out during play, but don't plan an exact story. This is good, right? These are story hooks. These are a problem that needs solving. Let the players do the job. Start your first session with the first job event, right? In your first session, the game explicitly says just be in a job, right? Don't offer them the job and then let them decide. Be like, you are on this job. This is happening. That's how you do one shots, right? Where you're just like, so it was 5 clicks outside beta reticuli when everything went wrong, right? Instead of being like, welcome to the one shot. Here's 16 jobs you can choose from. Pick one, have fun. Now, in a longer campaign, I imagine you would create several jobs, like I did with Swansong, create several jobs, and then let the players decide what they want to take on. So if the PCs are going to be looking for ways to profit, to keep the ship flying and line their own pockets. Typical job that lasts a session, 30 to 50 credits is a good range. Lengthier important jobs might pay up to 100 credits. New ship upgrades are 50 credits, and players will be spending some of that on fuel and ship repairs as they travel. So XP moving up, money moving up, filling in things like I hope that the economy of the game in play, you would reach the point where you've maxed out your character and you've maxed out the ship around the same time. The credit economy and the XP economy should probably move at about the same rate. And if you get more credits, there needs to be more pulling them back, right? More things to spend. Notice, A, we haven't seen anything about paying off our debt yet. And B, the main reward in the game is XP. So give your players a little extra money won't break anything too badly. Yeah, I'm starting to think that the Debt Runner thing is not a misnomer, but it's like Debt Runner flavored sci-fi adventure. Yeah. Interesting. Because in this, it seems like you're moving towards a final goal, whereas in a more traditional Debt Runner game, you're trying to go from negative to 0 rather than from 0 up. Yeah. So NPCs have 3 things in the game. Well, 4. They have a description, they have health, they have armor, and they deal damage. The way that this differentiates wimpy or strong monsters is with number of dice, bonuses to those dice, and then an advantage or disadvantage system. Starships are the same. They have hull, armor, and damage, and you can tweak and remix them. I imagine, and I haven't seen it yet. I'm just looking at gear. It doesn't look like gear have like tags outside of easily hidden or heavy, right? Like there's really nothing differentiating a security guard, a beat cop, a trained thug, aside from health, armor, and damage, and your narration thereof. So I guess character name and description is a pretty big part of that, so that you know fictionally how to bring them to life at the table, right? A thug is going to be equipped differently and deal their 1d6 damage differently than a beat cop would. Theoretically, right? So now we get into the big stuff. So if you play multiple sessions of the game, it can't just be a single job in a single location. How do we build a universe? In this, it's star maps, factions, and timelines. So a star map, we are told to make a map by getting a blank piece of paper, drawing a star in the middle, leaving lots of space, drawing a dot. That's the location where the PC's first job took place. A planet, a moon, a space station, whatever. So you start with a star. You start with something orbiting the star. You give the star a name. You think about who is in charge of this system. They will become your first faction, right? And I like this. I give this advice for fantasy games all the time. Start with the village. What's happening in this village? The village is in a county. The county is in a country, right? Or a province. The province is a country. Country is in a continent, and you expand out, but only as the players wander around, right? So if you want to consider other locations in the star system and add 1 or 2 now, I would suggest on top of this advice, put on the map anything anyone has mentioned, right? Player homeworlds. If a player just casually, like if you have a Jesse Cox in your party who is like, oh, these pirates are obviously from the Florthon Nebula, which is a dangerous nebula at the edge of space, you just make a little note, and later when you get back to your star map, you add the Florthon Nebula so that it becomes real, right? This is a way to say yes to player bullshit, because this empty map needs filling and you don't want to do it all yourself, right? So in this case, you're adding other locations. You can add in some other stars if they belong to the same hegemon. And then let your mind wander. If there's any other cool stuff you want to add, you can, but leave space. The map will never truly be complete. Remember, it takes a week and a unit of drive fuel to get from place to place. This is a very Powered by the Apocalypse way of drawing maps. We've already got our first faction. Note the factions on the map and give them competing goals. You really only need 2 to start, but you can create some pretty serious intrigue with 3 or 4. So that's good advice too, right? Don't overdo it. Make the factions oppose one another. Factions aren't friends, as much as they'd like to pretend that they are. They're not really. And you'll use them as the driving forces for the next thing, which is your timeline. So like a job is a framework for a single session, your timeline is a framework for the whole campaign. Think about the factions, their goals, what is happening. Write down a list of 3 to 5 events. These are things that will happen in the future. This is your front, right? For this game, right? A timeline escalates towards instability, the final event being a fundamental change in the setting, like war breaks out, something really bad happens to a certain system. The universe changes if we get there, and then use them as the basis for creating new jobs. So like with Stars Without Number, the player's actions are related to and driven by the conflict of those things larger than themselves. And in this way, it's like with the Sprawl, where the Sprawl is the real characters in the Sprawl are the factions, right? They're the corporations. In this, the greater world determines what we do within it. So I think that's cool. Leave your timelines flexible and uncertain. If in the course of a job, the PCs prevent something from happening, change the timeline, right? This is still playing to find out what happens. It's a stakes question about the campaign setting in general. Yeah. And then we get some tables, some useful tables, some D6 by D6 tables. So we can have world types, we can have themes, we can have objects in space, we got cargo, we got names. Good stuff, right? Useful things. We've talked a ton about tables in sci-fi games. This page, okay, yep, just one page. This page is the campaign setting of Offworlders. This is it. This is our Forgotten Realms. This is our Dark Sun. This is the known universe, right? Because it tells us what could exist, right? It doesn't tell us what does exist, but it gives us a limited fundamental selection of the things that are possible. So because a planet with no children and mutants under martial law is possible, that is a part of the game, right? Welcome to Kion 4, a managed low-tech, high-population democracy. This is our campaign setting, and I think that for me, personally, this is infinitely more interesting than like Dragonlance, right? I see a finished campaign setting as having been wrung out already, whereas I see something like this as a campaign setting waiting to surprise me. And surprise is a very, very important part of playing a role-playing game. And then lastly, we get our very nicely designed simple character sheets, right? Just a lot of checkboxes. All of the classes fit on one sheet. The sheet is 2-sided. We get the sheet's 1-sided because we're just writing down our look and our gear. We're checking the boxes here. It's a little more minimal than most PBTA. Like you would need a book alongside this, but the PDF is free and the book's only 30 pages. So it's a little more, I think John Harper would probably have put all of the rules on this page. But John is the kind of designer who makes character sheets and then makes games to justify them grudgingly, versus a character sheet being a thing that you can use to play a game. But this is just a simple character sheet. You're going to need to refer back to the game to use it. But for the most part, like skills, you don't need to check in on. I would make notes of my abilities, I think, because I wouldn't be able necessarily to remember even just 2. But nice minimal thing. Ship, chosen upgrades. What does the ship look like? You could draw a picture if you can draw, or if you're like me, just describe what the ship looks like. And then and I think this is interesting, rather than like lay out a bunch of different ways to hack the game, which is like a whole chapter thing in and of itself, the game ends with an invitation, right? The game ends with Offworlders is designed to be extremely open to interpretation, remixing, and hacking. Negotiating specific uses abilities and making smart rulings about dice rolls at the table is part of the fun. I encourage you to come up with new classes, abilities, aliens, and weird gear for your game. Talk to me on Twitter at Chris Perry Wolf or join the Offworlders Discord server. Show us what you come up with. And I think it's a cool invitation. I think that there are bits and pieces, there are hints throughout the game about how we might go about breaking this game, but it's interesting that we were given permission and then just invited to do the thing. So yeah, I think for me, like this is the sort of pickup version of Stars Without Number, right? Like I would never run a Stars Without Number one shot because the system has too much going on. But this is the kind of thing that we could very easily bring to the table. I do wish that there was like a page of guidance, right? How do I break this game? Get me started, right? Like this feels halfway between the golden rule, right? Like you can change anything, ignore the rules. It doesn't say that, but it's not quite enough guidance. I would have loved one more page before being invited to share my stuff, right? Because I have a ton of experience with Powered by the Apocalypse, with World of Dungeons. Like I would hack the living shit out of this game really, really quickly and really easily, almost intuitively, because that's the kind of play. But it would be nice to have some examples. It'd be nice to have a page that says whatever, or an opportunity for a supplemental like 2 or 3 page thing, right? Called Break This Game, right? Offworlders, break this game, and then give me a little mini supplement helping me understand how to break it, and maybe some community projects, maybe a couple of things like here's a new class. If you've read Apocalypse World, at the end of Apocalypse World, Vincent gives us some moves. It says if you wanted to make Apocalypse World into a parkour zombie game, here's a move. If you want to make it into a dungeon crawl adventure game, here's a move. Right? It pulls things from the playtesting and the fan community. So maybe rather than adding that to the game, it would be a cool thing to see as a supplement. Like, how can I break this? Because I don't know that everyone would see this page as being encouraging necessarily. I think it's a cool invitation, but I would love to have seen a little bit more advice. And honestly, you know, I think that Offworlders, it would work for me because I understand both the setting and the mechanisms really, really intuitively. I don't know that it would be great necessarily for people who are not already familiar with those things. I think this is a lovely game if you're coming much like World of Dungeons. I think it's a lovely game if you're coming from an existing milieu or an existing understanding of the mechanisms of those sorts of games into this. I would play the crap out of this, and I definitely will, right? I will carry this PDF around on my iPad, and I know I will run one-shots of Offworlders totally improvised using just those tables and the rules. But I would be interested to see for folks who maybe don't have that fundamental understanding of the setting or don't have that fundamental understanding of the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff. You know, how easy is this game to run? Like, did you have success? What did your players bring to the table? What did you change about the rules? What did you add? It's very bare bones, but I think that's its strength, right? Not every game has to be for everyone. And I think that for me, particularly, the combination of the graphic design, of the setting, the material that this game gives me, I think it's very useful. I would definitely get some use out of this. But that's how games work, right? You know, some games work really well for some groups and other games don't work for groups. So it's cool to see a very streamlined version of a genre that I really like. And it's funny because looking at Offworlders, I feel that very designer specific sense of relief, because there was a time where I kind of thought like, okay, what would we need to do? What would I need to do to make a World of Dungeons version of Stars Without Number? How could I get the Stars Without Number experience, but with the improvisational stuff of Powered by the Apocalypse? So thank you, Chris and Olivia, for doing that hard work for me, and for giving it out for free. So if you're interested in checking it out yourself, giving it a try, take it to your local game group and throw down a one shot of Offworlders and tweet at me or tweet at Chris and let us know how it was, because I'm curious about people's real lived experience of these games. You can find it on DriveThruRPG if you just search for Offworlders, or if you are watching this in Twitch, there's a command Offworlders, or on YouTube, just check down below in the description and it will link you right to Offworlders on DriveThru. So go check it out. You can get the PDF for free, or you can buy a very lovely, and I think I'm going to show you. I really like that. I really like that they showed us the print version in real life. Yeah, it's a cute little like zine format book, and I think I'm going to order it in print because I think that the design deserves a physical form. I'd like to see it. So you can check it out. It's on DriveThru. Give it a try. Let me know. Let me know in the comments, or let me know on Twitter if you got a chance to play it and what you thought. So that'll be it for our first look at Offworlders, a game of sci-fi adventure by Chris Wolf and Olivia Gulen. I hope that you have learned a little something about a new game, and I hope that you go out and you give it a try. Thanks for coming, everybody, and we will see you next time.